doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.
And so I'm going to ask you, Kenneth, to really, as a RegTech investor, to really just help us walk through the process that you take and you approach RegTech investments from, and what your advice would be to African policymakers, governments, and private investors when considering embarking on trade-related RegTech investment opportunities in support of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And please, the more examples, the better. Thank you. Over to you, Kenneth.
I want to thank you very much, Hubert, for having me here. Great panel, great discussions. We've seen a lot of changes here. We're based in New York City. We've seen a lot of change, but we do work with partnerships with a lot of government service entities like the Hong Kong Trade Development Councils, like the Japan Exchange Trade Organization. So we do a lot of cross-border, what they call foreign direct investments that's being done, both going inbound as well as outbound. But what we've seen in a typical trade element, you see the top five: e-commerce, intellectual property, state-owned enterprises, which is the small, medium-sized firms, labor, as well as in dealing with environmental issues. Now, what we have noticed, the mindset has changed because of COVID-19. And so what we have done is we've taken what we call a future work and future of living perspective. And the future work, the way we got that is it goes back to your first question, Hubert, in terms of the differences between what's happened with a RegTech firm in terms of a small medium enterprise versus a corporate firm. The future work came from a large corporation known as Salesforce, which is what they're doing. They're trying to find ways to get people back to working, getting back to normalization of life. And that's critical in terms of how we address certain opportunities, certain issues that may occur. One issue may be the edutech space that we're seeing. A huge interest in edutech and virtual education in terms of training and development. And the reason why that's significant is because as a former regulator from a central bank, from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, you want to identify, but you want to also report and monitor training development that's being done at many corporations. So we're finding a lot of interest in edutech and virtual education. Another area of interest is supply chain. A lot of these firms, both small media enterprises as well as large firms, are looking at supply chain issues. As you know, with COVID-19, the global supply chain has been pretty much at pause at the very moment. So firms are looking in terms of finding ways to digitize their platforms and looking at third-party investors to come in, third-party providers to come in and actually solve those issues. I'll give you a prime example. We've been working with one of the major liquor firm around the world. They provide a lot of beverages, and they've actually created a private platform that's going to use a combination of blockchain technology, distributed ledger technology, artificial intelligence, which mainly centered on machine learning, cloud computing. And the focus here is to address some of these regulatory issues in terms of anti-bribery, anti-corruption, supply chain issues. And these firms are some large firms in the world. So they address the issues of supply chain from the core in terms of how you produce a product to the finalization of the product. Now, the key with doing that is that it addresses a lot of the issues that you have from a regulatory standpoint. So you address the issues of anti-bribery, anti-corruption. You address the issue of privacy in terms of actually identification of different third-party vendors on the platform, anti-money laundering and KYC. So all those particular issues are RegTech firms that actually are being produced. And the great thing about this platform is driven by a large cap firm that's listed on the exchange. So it's driven by a large cap firm, but they're also attracting small media enterprises to come in and to actually fill in those gaps. From the landscape in terms of the future of living, we're identifying how people are living. COVID-19 has caused people to live differently across different urban cities. So you have what they call urban technology, in terms of how you ride your bike to locations, whether you go to parks, in terms of how do you drive your car. So what that's done is that they've actually allowed for a level of digital transformation that can be done in terms of big data, where you're actually using satellite technology, what they call location intelligence, to allow for, let's say, the central government of the city to be able to monitor and identify for safety and security in terms of how people are moving back and forth. So we've identified several firms that provide those particular opportunities. We realize that that is probably going to be the future state in terms of how we're going to be living, both not here in the US, but globally. We're seeing that across the globe in multiple jurisdictions. To answer your questions, how would I address regulators? I think being a former regulator myself, there's a lot of examples you can look at, Hubert. And I give you an example. You have sandboxes that are being done down in Australia, New Zealand. You have the sandbox that's been done in Singapore. Here in the U.S., the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System is using what they call Fed Now. And the unique thing about sandboxes is that it allows for an opportunity for, let's say, a small medium enterprise fintech firm to actually go in and work on some problems or opportunities to create solutions. And that could be from, let's say, GDPR to liquidity issues. And liquidity could be from like the liquidity coverage ratios, where you have let's say a RegTech firm that's actually have an application that can solve that issue, both in-house, but also at other institutions. And those are the things that, I would address in terms of you do have examples that are provided throughout the world. I just recently did some work with the Bahamas. I love what they've done down in the Bahamas, where they actually, one of the key challenges that they had, actually, they identified an opportunity where they saw an asset, and one of the assets were pirate ships. And they were getting those pirate ships offshore, and it was using logistic intelligence, satellite intelligence, to identify these particular pirate ships. And they wanted to find a way to capitalize off that. It's kind of difficult to do that once you pull the ship out of the water, because it loses the value. So what they realized, that the opportunity that presented itself was to create a blockchain technology, and they reached out to a small medium enterprise firm to create the technology to digitize that asset. And what it did was twofold. They were able to take pictures and use those pictures, or digitize pictures, and bring them more to different art shows. And that's how one level you were bringing on liquidity. And the other level of bringing on liquidity was you providing a secondary source of liquidity to other participants in the marketplace. So those are creative ideas that you can do in terms of digital transformation, at least in terms of RegTech firms. I think nowadays what you're finding is that RegTech firms are seeking opportunities to look at the new future living and a new future of going to work. And that, I would have to say, is probably what I have been seeing in the past couple of months, actually.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.